All right. All right, this is Jamie at NASCA. We're getting ready to kick off our webinar, so we're giving everyone a few minutes to log on. Everyone logs on a few minutes late, so we're going to do that. Hopefully, everyone, if you're on, we're super excited to have you here today. So we're just doing a few more minutes to let people log on, and we are super excited to kick off this webinar here in about 2 minutes. And I want to welcome everyone from the NASCA headquarters as well as the NCFA headquarters. And we'll kick off here in a minute. All right, so we are going to officially kick off our webinar today. This is Jamie Rogers at the NASCA headquarters and the NCSFA headquarters. We're super excited to kick off our webinar today, the On the Table. And so that's a series that NASCA has been doing for a while, but it's a state member only call. And the goal really here is to connect state to state and encourage state to state learning. But I do want to, if we'll go to the next slide, Kayla, I know we have a lot of people on the call today that may not be members of one of the other associations, and so I want to tell you a little bit about both NASCA and NCSFA. So NASCA, we're the Association of State Chief Administrators, and so we work with all 50 states, the Chief Administrator role, and our mission is to work with Chief Administrators and their teams, so their senior teams, to really focus on government operations. So to strategically transform state government operations through the power of shared knowledge and thought leadership, bringing people together and then leading best practices. And so for those who may not be familiar with the Chief Administrator, it looks a little bit different in every state, but usually this is the senior level official that oversees the operation side of government. So that can include fleet, facilities, procurement, IT, HR, those are some of the traditional responsibilities, but like we said, it looks a little bit different in every state. And then we're also super excited. We know we have NCSFA here today, and that's a very similar association of convening people, leading, connecting, and representing fleet administrators in state government and in public universities. So that's a little bit about your host, and now I'm going to kick it over to Tommy. The one thing, and it looks like a lot of people have done this, that I do want to just some ground rules. If you have your, if you're on the phone or on your computer, go ahead and mute that right now. But then remember, there's a lot of interaction throughout this that we're going to ask you to unmute or to give some feedback. And so at that point, remember to unmute. But if you'll go ahead and unmute your, or mute your phones, I'm going to kick it over to Tommy.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, so just this is Tommy Morrison, Executive Director of NCSFA. Just want to briefly touch on why this webinar and why now. Electrification in fleet has become a key topic in the broader conversation of sustainability and the elimination of greenhouse gases in state government. According to the EPA, nearly 1/3 of carbon emissions come from the transportation sector. So it makes sense that an increasing number of state governors and legislators have created emission goals for the implementation of clean vehicles and fuels in their respective states. As with any implementation of new technology, there are challenges and obstacles that affect many stakeholders. Today's webinar's objective is for chief and fleet administrators to discuss the implementation of electric vehicles and clean fuels in their state fleet, and to share insights on how you all work together across agencies to respond to this and other challenges. We would also like to welcome colleagues from state government that may not be directly housed under the Department of Administration, such as if you're from the State Energy's office, welcome. And we welcome your contributions on this cross-agency topic as well. Next slide, Kayla. So it is the goal of today's webinar to not only be informative, but also an opportunity, as Jamie alluded to engage in conversation. So we had 29 states registered for today's webinar, and that represents a spectrum of different experiences, thoughts, and opinions on the topic. So we hope that you'd be willing to share throughout our time together to increase the learning and dialogue for all attendees during these 60 minutes. Just a real fast go over our agenda so you know where we're at. We're going to start with the state of Colorado case study, then a state of California case study. Then we'd also like to welcome the National Governors Association, the Energy, Infrastructure, and Environment Division, to give a report on the work they're doing centered around electrification. And then we're going to leave a good amount of time to have some moderated conversation. So we're looking forward to that. Next slide, Caitlin. Just to start things off, though, before we pass it off to Colorado, we have 2 questions on the slides, and we'd like to hear from a few attendees. Just to get the conversation started, please choose one of these questions to answer. The first one is, what is one of the biggest successes or obstacles in the implementation of sustainability in your state fleet? Or secondly, what is one question you would like addressed in today's conversation? So I'll open it up for a few of our attendees to respond.
And now's the time you may have to remember to unmute yourself. And this is just a great way to learn a little bit more about who's on the call. We're going to have a more moderated conversation later. But with that, is there anyone that wants to tell us who they are and pick one of these questions?
Tommy, this is Scott Edwards from the state of Colorado. I just wanted to take a stab at some of this, kind of what we've done, if that's what you're looking for, or we could kind of start that off.
Yeah, you can answer one of those questions, Scott.
Sure. I think you're going to hear in our presentation also that you're going to hear challenges around probably the clear goal and how that works. So I think in the conversations that we've had within the organizations is having that goal identified is really important. So I think that the very first question is probably one of the biggest obstacles, and we're starting to turn that into a success, and hopefully you'll hear that as well. So that would be my input to that conversation.
Thanks, Scott. Would anyone else like to respond to one of those questions?
This is Tara Merrifield from the state of New Hampshire. One of our biggest obstacles that we've found here, and if anybody has insight to this, it would be greatly appreciated, but we have a requirement that any electrification, especially if it's available for public use, has to be borne by the user. So if the public's going to charge at any of our charging stations, they have to pay for it, and that's been very difficult for us to find a cost-effective solution for that.
Gotcha. Thank you, Tara. Anyone else?
I put that in. But the savings is just getting more like that. Helps. That's
okay. Well, thank you for those that responded. We'll circle back on these during the moderated question format, but we'll move on to the state of Colorado's case study. Next slide, please. So first, we'll hear an update from Colorado's Executive Director for the Department of Personnel and Administration, Cara Veitch. Cara served as the Deputy Director for Colorado's DPA in July 2013 and became Director in 2018. Colorado's Management of Fleet Operations is Scott Edwards, and he's served in this capacity with the state since 2015. And we'll let Cara and Scott, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much for having created this opportunity so that we can learn not just across states, but also in different agencies, because sometimes we lose touch with that. So this is a great opportunity also to hear from the feds, our National Governors Association as well. So with that, we kind of put this quick presentation together on how did we get here, what were the drivers, where we are, and then kind of where we're going. So next slide, please, Kayla. The first driver for us is around leadership, and really what has been most effective for us is when the governor wants to dig in and lead on electrification of vehicles. And so you'll see this isn't new for us. We've been doing this for a long time. Our first executive order came around 2004, and then with the new governor, Governor Polis is heavily focused on this area. He's already had 2 executive orders. The first one was around ZEV adoption, which created an electrification working group across agencies to work on strategies to support transportation electrification around the whole state. So not just in state government, but statewide for all of our Coloradans. It also directed our public health agency to create a zero emission vehicle program and propose rules to the Air Quality Control Commission. It repurposed our Volkswagen money to focus on electrification of transportation. And fourth, directed our transportation agency to develop a plan to align transportation investments with widespread deployment of zero emission vehicles. This has also resulted in our energy office as well as our Department of Transportation working with manufacturers to make sure that we can get the right cars into the state to support this initiative. And then the last executive order on this was just a few months ago around greening government, and this reaffirmed our commitment to a variety of initiatives in state government, but also particularly around electric vehicles in the fleet, and set some standards. And this is what Scott was talking about, clear goals. What is our goal? How many electric vehicles do we want? And the leadership on this from the governor's office has been hugely important in allowing us to move forward, and that has trickled down to executive directors. So our process of acquiring cars is very convoluted in the state, but state fleet identifies which cars should be replaced. We work with the agencies, they agree, and then we identify which ones are suitable for alternative fleet vehicles. And if the agency thinks they aren't, the executive director or cabinet secretary is what you refer to in other states, has to sign off on that. That is then reviewed by our department and the energy office in consultation with the governor's office. So really making sure this is a priority, and having the governor's thumb on this has really been helpful in moving this forward. Next slide, Kayla. The next driver for us is around data, and how do we use data to make really good decisions? We in Colorado spent a few years investing in CNG vehicles, and we just had a push to buy them. And what we learned from that process was you need to use data to acquire those vehicles, and put the infrastructure in place. So use the data to put the infrastructure in place, and then buy the vehicles. We did not do that in the CNG space. That learning has been very helpful in how we are purchasing electric vehicles through the state. So the use of telematics around vehicles is helping us to understand where to put alternative fuel vehicles based on their function and use, right sizing our fleet. So do we have too many cars? Do we have not enough cars? What should those cars look like? And then also, it can be used to reinforce good driving behavior through carrot and stick programs. So we know some departments have good driving programs where they take this data and can understand who's driving well and who's not. There's friendly competitions between drivers, and you can use this data in their performance plans as well. We are in the process of deploying telematics across the 6,300 state vehicles that we manage through state fleet management over the next 4 years. Next slide. And third, and I think almost most importantly, is you can't forget the change management that comes with pushing to electric vehicles. And this is really our third driver. And so we spend lots of time understanding our customer and their concerns around moving to electric vehicles. So we convene, every agency has a fleet manager. We convene all of those managers monthly and spend time talking to them about what are their experiences with electric vehicles, what's working well, what's not working well, how can we remove obstacles to their utilization of electric vehicles. We put together benchmark dashboards and review those with all of the agencies so they understand progress in this area. We provide them updates on sustainability and greening government, as well as legislation once a month. And then we also convene a subcommittee on petroleum reduction. And this is, again, a cross-state initiative. So it's state fleet management, our green government group, all the agency fleet managers, or some of the agency fleet managers, and our energy office to really look at petroleum reduction. We are, again, kind of highlighting that need for good data. We provide monthly dashboards to all of the agencies so they understand how their fleet vehicles are being used, whether they could have, in the EV space, you can understand or where charging stations are and whether or not their cars are passing charging stations without charging, and how do we inform drivers around those things. And so really focusing on data. We also produce the report centrally so that this helps us have a consistent discussion around agencies, and then we provide training to those agencies in areas like grant opportunities to help us put in the infrastructure needed for electric vehicles, as well as what kind of the trends, and then again, training on how to analyze that data. So the agencies are making really good decisions in their decisions to purchase electric vehicles. And then third for us has been creating an incentive program around alternative fuel vehicles. And one of the things we've done is we reimburse agencies when they spend their fuel dollars on alternative fuels. And this allows them to free up their dollars so they can use it on things like charging stations. And then we will fund pilot programs in agencies to see if that could roll out statewide. Scott, do you have anything to add, or maybe some good examples that would resonate with the audience?
I think some of the biggest things that we've seen as successes is when people start talking about funding, is that because of our the way we're work, and we can actually help them with the understanding of how to coordinate some of that funding in place. So if they show us a need or desire for the vehicle, a good use case, then we oftentimes have the ability to help them with the funding. In many of these cases that we've done in the past, we've actually gone out for the vehicles and actually applied for the grant funds that help us offset the cost differential between the standard petroleum vehicle and an electric vehicle. I think also having had really good communications back and forth between leadership and the frontline staff in the agencies to support that conversation of need is really helpful. I think it's starting to demonstrate some of the needs for helping bring in the outside with our energy office to demonstrate where the grant funding opportunities there are as well. So it really makes the conversation become a little bit more standardized. I think those are some of the things that in the cultural side, it just backs up what's being seen in the front lines as well as what's being seen from the administrative side.
Great, thank you, Scott. Kayla, next slide, please. So focusing on that, this is a snapshot of our last 5 years of purchasing vehicles. And let me just give you a little bit of framework about our process to purchase. So we ask for money centrally for all of the state fleet vehicles, regardless of what agency they are in, which agency uses those vehicles. When we ask for vehicles, we need to specify, I want 5, this type, make, and model car, and then the General Assembly will say, nope, you can't have 5, you can have 2. So we are funded at that very minuscule level for vehicles, which makes it a difficult, it takes away flexibility and the ability to move more quickly in purchasing electric vehicles. We do, however, have a statute that requires us to purchase alternative fuel vehicles if the lifespan cost of that vehicle is less than 110% of the cost of a gasoline vehicle. This year, we are exploring what happens if it's more than 110. What happens if we buy it, and how the General Assembly is going to respond to that. From the chart, you will see we're increasing in our EVs, and that the hybrids are starting to stabilize and be normalized in our purchasing and utilization by our customers. And then next slide, please, Kayla. Thank you. So this is a snapshot or a picture of the state of Colorado. The green are where we have electric vehicles now, and the orange is where we are putting the electric vehicles. And I'll show you, just keep that in mind, and then if you would go to the next slide, Kayla. The next slide is, the blue is where we have electric charging stations, state-owned electric charging stations, and the purple is where we want to put them. How we came to this is we had a vendor come in and spend some time with us and first understand where are all of our electric vehicles, and then develop a strategy of where to prioritize placement. You will note from the last slide that there are vehicles, particularly in the southwest corner of the state, that aren't near charging stations. And what this requires agencies to do is either swap them out with another agency car, or because of leadership, we're now able to swap them across departments. So if that is how we get more electric vehicles in the state, we will certainly do that. And so it really requires much more coordination amongst the agencies, and that is one of the roles that state fleet management continues to perform for us. Scott, anything you want to add?
No, I think that what you were talking about is the image with the electric vehicle locations, and the concept of moving them closer to where our charging stations is really key to deployment of EVs. I think that's one that I hear a lot of the sister states actually have challenges with, is how do you come up with the chicken or the egg concept. And I think with data, you start to see where you can put EV infrastructure in place. I think Tara had mentioned something along the lines of, where's your early success stories? I think you can look at charging infrastructure as something that the employees can also help with. Some of our early returns on the studies have shown that as much as 50% of our carbon emissions come from people who are driving to and from work. So when we start looking at the overall image or footprint of our carbon emissions, I think some of these thought processes are the way you help your infrastructure come into play. And then you can start also building with your internal organizations to be moving vehicles, because they do, you have your opportunities every year when you do a vehicle replacement. And when you're as tightly managed as we are with the concept of replacement, information really helps you roll that out a little more in a controlled manner. That's the things that I think that come from those slides, is looking at where they're at and where you need them.
Well said, Scott. Next slide, Taylor. That is it for the state of Colorado.
Well, thank you guys so much. Thank you both Scott and Kara. That was super interesting. But now we're going to shift over to Dan Kim and Brent Jamison from the state of California. Dan was appointed the director of the Department of General Services in May of 2015, and Brent Jamison was appointed the Deputy Director of Interagency Support Division of the Department of General Services in 2014, and works with the Office of Fleet and Asset Management. And so we're super excited to have our next speaker on the line, and I will hand the phone over to both Dan and Brent.
Thank you, Jamie. This is Dan Kim. I am literally in a Chevy Bolt, electric vehicle, in the carpool lane right now. So Brent Jamison is.
Did we lose Dan?
We may have lost Dan there for a minute, so it sounds like he was introducing you, Brent, if you want to take it over.
I think he accidentally muted. Everybody can hear me okay, though?
We can.
Wonderful. So Kayla, Tommy, thank you so much for setting this up. On behalf of Director Kim and myself, thank you to the National Conference of State Fleet Administrators and the National Association of State Chief Administrators for giving us this opportunity to share kind of the state of California's experience in adopting zero-emission vehicles into our fleet. We are really proud of the work that we've done in this area, and we hope that what we've learned can in some way maybe serve as assist other fleets and as they embark upon their electrification efforts and getting rid of internal combustion engines within their fleet. Next slide, please. There we go. So a little overview of the state of California fleet and kind of DGS's role with it. The state of California fleet is made up of nearly, actually over 50,000 assets. We define a state fleet asset as self-propelled and or registered with our Department of Motor Vehicles. So this is a really broad definition that ranges anywhere from boats to passenger vehicles to medium and heavy duty trucks to airplanes. So if the state of California owns it and it falls within that definition, by statute, the Department of General Services is required to oversee the state fleet and make sure that every acquisition in the state fleet is both cost effective and meets our sustainability and operational policies. Each year, the Office of Fleet and Asset Management, which is one of the programs in my division, we review over 3,000 vehicle acquisition requests annually. Next slide, please. So with regard to kind of our journey to electrification, I think Director Kim likes to refer to this as relentlessly incremental, and I think that's a great way to describe this. This started back in 2012 with regard to our electrification efforts, when Governor Brown issued former Governor Brown issued Executive Order B1612. And that executive order set a target for the whole of California to try and adopt 1.5 million zero-emission vehicles on California's roads by 2025. But the executive order also included what we like to refer to as a lead by example mandate, which was essentially if we want our California citizens and residents to drive ZEVs, then we, the government of California, need to do the same, and we need to do so in a meaningful way. So that executive order back in 2012 directed our state agencies to be overseen by DGS that 10% of all of our light duty fleet purchases beginning in 2015 needed to be zero emission vehicles. And that number goes up to 25% in 2020. And the only exemption to that policy were public safety vehicles with demonstrated special performance requirements. Over time, I won't go into each and every one of these, but we've built upon Governor Brown's initial vision, and we continue to do so with Governor Newsom's vision as well. And so in 2016, we actually increased the number of zero emission vehicles, the minimum requirements that our state agencies were going to need to meet on an annual basis, going all the way up to 50% by 2025, zero emission vehicle annual purchasing. We also implemented a policy that will increase the zero emission vehicle purchasing by 5% each year beginning in fiscal year 17-18, so that it slowly ramps up. It's not big jumps, but we're doing incremental jumps each year to hit 50% by 2025. And then finally, one of our big policies that were instrumental that I'll talk about a little later was what we believe to be a first in the nation ZEV hybrid first policy, which essentially directed our state agencies that regardless of whether they met their minimum purchasing requirements pursuant to either the executive order or subsequent DGS policies, that if they were replacing a vehicle or adding a vehicle to their fleet that could be a zero emission vehicle or a hybrid vehicle, they were going to be required to purchase it. Essentially, our policies require our agencies to purchase the greenest vehicle possible to meet their operational needs, period. And so with that policy, we're embarking on this slide. Our next effort is going to be in the medium and heavy duty sector. And so we're really excited to kind of foray into that avenue soon as well. Next slide, please. This slide that you see here can kind of give you an example of both kind of the initial policies, DGS's augmented policies, and what our results have been to date, albeit we really need to update this for 18-19, so my apologies. But you'll see the bright green basically represents initial executive orders and policies. And you'll see we've had the 10% going through 10% annual zero emission vehicle purchasing requirements going through 2020. It goes up to 25% in 2020, and then jumps to 50% in 2025. The blue bars there represent kind of the DGS policies working with the administration. I should caveat, none of this is done in a vacuum, working with both our fleet managers and the administration. And that's when we set an even higher bar beginning in 17-18 that we needed to ratchet up our zero emission vehicle purchasing. The teal is our actual compliance levels. It's what we actually achieve beyond just kind of the minimum purchasing requirements. And so you'll see every year, and I can positively say, including 18-19, although those numbers aren't this slide, we have exceeded our minimum ZEV purchasing requirements. And this is in large part due both to our great fleet managers throughout the state and their kind of forward thinking and progressive adoption of ZEVs, as well as these policies and a lot of collaborative efforts. And I'll get into that later. Next slide, please. This slide just very quickly kind of shows you the kind of cumulatively our progress to date. Beginning in 2012 through 2017, you'll see that cumulatively between hybrids, plug-in hybrids, battery electrics, and fuel cell vehicles, I can tell you actually through 2019, we have well surpassed 3,000 vehicles of these types of vehicles in our fleet, and each year they continue to grow. As a matter of fact, for zero emission vehicles, including plug-in hybrids, battery electrics, and fuel cells, we passed 1,000 vehicles back in 2019 cumulatively in our fleet. So clearly the policies are having a real-world impact and integration into the California state fleet. Next slide, please. So really briefly, I'm going to kind of go into kind of the 5 main elements of what we believe are kind of our keys to success. Next slide, please. The first one, and kind of echoing Colorado's sentiments, is without a doubt access and use of data. Believe it or not, prior to 2008, even though the Department of General Services had long had staff fleet in any given day. We did not have a centralized database system, and we did not have we did not have a modern method of collecting that type of data, and that changed very quickly in 2008 when we established a statewide, what we call our fleet and asset management system. It's a data warehouse that all of our fleet owning departments are required to enter into on a monthly basis. This includes everything from vehicle composition to days used to mileage used to fuel consumption, original costs, maintenance expenses. It is a very robust database and truly is the cornerstone of our ability to analyze our fleet and develop realistically achievable policies. The pie chart that you see on this slide is really important. In 2016, when we were trying to figure out how we could push the needle on ZEV adoption, and we were trying to think of kind of how we could ratchet up our minimum ZEV purchasing standards, what that pie chart represents is our whole fleet composition. And you can see that we are over 50% truck, van, and SUV. And we have a number of fleet owning departments that have a significantly large, almost whole composition of just truck, vans, and SUVs, such as our Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, our Department of Fish and Wildlife, even our Department of Transportation, all truck, van, and SUV heavy. And so it was this chart that really led to our ZEV hybrid first policy and thinking about how departments that are more sedan heavy could step up and do more. And again, all driven by data. Next slide, please. I've already touched on this before, but just to reiterate, strong central oversight. There is not a vehicle that is purchased by a department that does not go through our Office of Fleet and Asset Management. And those requests are reviewed against the myriad of operational and sustainability policies that our departments are required to adhere to. And those control mechanisms truly help us ensure that we meet and achieve these policies. If we receive what we call a fleet acquisition plan that's in and it is not compliant, we do not hesitate to send it back and require additions. Also, similar to some of the comments Colorado made about kind of upper level oversight and sign off, those fleet acquisition plans are signed off at the highest level of a department, both with the department director and that department's agency secretary, as applicable, required to sign off on those plans before before DGS ever receives them. And that's also to help us ensure compliance with these policies. Next slide, please. Other keys to success include education through outreach. We do a number of outreach events. We invite, we have quarterly, what we call stakeholder work groups with all of our fleet managers. We never develop policy in a vacuum. All these policies are actually developed with our fleet managers, trying to get meaningful input. If we don't have input, then we're just setting ourselves up for failure. We also have a number of events, including this is a picture of our Capitol Steps Alt Car event, where we bring a number of vendors to the Capitol Steps once a year and allows state and local fleet managers to come kick the tires and do riding drives, as well as we often will invite, we'll call it our green vendors, various OEMs, to these fleet manager work groups to tell us about kind of their latest sustainability products that can help us achieve our policy goals. Next slide, please. We also think that transparency is a key pillar to our success. We developed, a couple of years back, we developed a website that is accessible to all of you if anybody's curious. It's green.ca.gov/fleet. This website not only includes our electrification progress, but will also include metrics for the entire state fleet, including our broader goals of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and reducing our petroleum consumption. And we've made significant achievements in those areas as well, which I admit is not the focus of this presentation. But if anybody's curious as to our achievements, we like to be very transparent. This website breaks it down by state agency in terms of achievements. And so it makes it very transparent and hopefully motivational. Next slide, please. As mentioned, our success is never done in a vacuum or done by any one entity, even internal or external to DGS. In addition to our Office of Fleet and Asset Management, We have multiple internal organizations here that have been key to our successes in fleet electrification, including our procurement division that is responsible for getting the latest vehicle products on contract as quickly as possible. Just trying to flood our fleet managers with options. Our facilities management and real estate divisions helping to electrify our facilities, as well as our Office of Sustainability, who now has nearly a $20 million annual budget that is dedicated just to help support fleet electrification, and just on the infrastructure side, not the vehicle differential side. Then, of course, as well, our external partners going all the way up to the governor's office, our fleet owning departments, our agency, the Department of Finance, our work with our clean cities, vehicle manufacturers, et cetera, et cetera. Partnering internally and externally has been a critical component to our success. Next slide, please. And on this slide, if Dan is still available, I'd love to hand it over to him to talk about kind of the importance of high-level support.
Great, thanks, Brent. Let's see if this works. By high-level support, we are talking about the governor's office and how critical it is to get them to support what we're doing. As chief administrators, our job is to make sure that the tracks are running safely, smoothly, and timely. We do all that operational stuff. But we're seeing increasingly a nexus between policy and operations. And that's a good thing. I think it was Henry Ford who once said that vision without execution is hallucination. So for the governor to make sure that his policies are realized, he needs to make sure that there's a strong operational arm. And we've been working really well, kind of hand in glove, with the governor's office on these types of efforts. So with respect to Governor Brown and Governor Newsom, they've both given us high-level direction to meet certain electric vehicle and emission targets. But they also gave us the opportunity to weigh into those executive orders and gave us a lot of latitude on how we were actually going to operationalize them. And that's been really important. So as you can tell from what Brent's talked about, we have actually taken a lot of initiative and shared with the governor's office some of the things that we've wanted to do, and we've been doing incrementally. So whether it's developing policies to incentivize vehicle purchases that were electric vehicles or restrictive purchase of non-electric vehicles, we've also created a greater variety of electric vehicles that were available. We've switched to renewable diesel. We've changed our methodology to approve new vehicle purchases. So all of these things have been done at the same time. So it wasn't just one change, but multiple policy and operational changes that have helped us get to where we're at now. And I think because of all of these different operational changes that we've made, we've gotten a lot of credibility from the administration, and they've actually looked to us to help achieve their desired goals and actually set a lot of the policy goals. Now I'm going to turn it back to Brent to talk about some of the lessons learned through this process.
Thank you, Dan. So just really quickly, because I know we're going long on time, but this is really tracks well with just the presentation we've just given. Clearly, data informs. It has been a cornerstone to our policy formulation and execution, taking away excuses, giving them what they need, right? Giving them as much product as we possibly can, educating them as much as possible, bringing in vendors. As Dan mentioned, again, being relentlessly incremental. Don't just sit on one policy, but use the data to inform how you can continue to push. And again, not just push for the sake of pushing, but pushing your goals with realistically achievable outcomes. Cover all angles: data, goals, rates, policies, review. We've talked about all that. And again, tracking performance, being transparent and accountable, that if our regular conversations with our fleet managers and department executives weren't enough, certainly putting it up on a website and making it public, as I mentioned, can be very motivational. And I think that's really all helped California to be successful. Next slide, please. So that is it for California, and this is our contact information, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Brent. Thank you, Dan. We will have some time for questions here at the end, but we're going to get rolling straight into NGA. So we'd like to introduce from the National Governors Association, Jessica Rackley, Matt Rogatsky. Jessica is the program director, and Matt is a policy analyst for the Energy, Infrastructure, and Environment Division of NGA. In September 2019, NGA released a white paper titled Transportation Electrification States Rev Up, and This was as a result of conversations in 4 regional workshops with 40 states and territories participating. This white paper covered how states are approaching EV adoption in their state and included how state fleets are attempting to lead by example. We look forward to hearing your thoughts, Jessica and Matt. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Tommy. And first off, we'd like to thank NCSFA and NASCA for inviting us to speak on this webinar today. I'm Jessica Rackley, a program director in the Energy, Infrastructure, and Environment Division at the National Governors Association, and I'm joined by my colleague Matt Rogotsky, who will also be sharing some information on our electrification work. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about the National Governors Association for those that aren't familiar with our organization. We're a longstanding organization founded over 100 years ago. We're a nonpartisan organization and represent the governors of all 55 states, territories, and commonwealths. Matt and I both work in the Center for Best Practices at NGA and primarily work with governors' energy, environmental, and transportation policy advisors. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the types of assistance we offer to governors' offices and other state policymakers. Today we're going to speak about some regional workshops we held in 2019 on transportation electrification and EV policy trends we're seeing, along with areas for collaboration among state agencies. Next slide, please. So as Tommy had mentioned, NGA in 2019, we held 4 different regional transportation electrification workshops to talk to a number of different state and other stakeholders in the space about challenges states are seeing and policy solutions moving forward. These workshops discussed how transportation electrification can help achieve a variety of environmental, economic, energy, reliability, resiliency, and security goals across states. Matt's going to talk a little bit more about the takeaways from those regional workshops. I'm going to talk about broader policy trends and the leadership of governors' offices. Next slide, please. So this slide just shows my remarks are framed around 2 key topics: how state fleet electrification fits into governor and state's broader policy strategy, and governor-led efforts to convene stakeholders to advance EVs across multiple agencies. And some general trends that we're seeing is that governors are increasingly releasing executive orders that adopt state fleet EV targets, along with broader, more ambitious environmental, climate, and clean energy goals for the state. In particular, strengths of the governor's offices are establishing cross-agency working groups to develop plans and EV roadmaps to help meet these goals. And we, in general, expect these trends to continue and increase, especially as new initiatives are rolled out, such as the Transportation Climate Initiative, which we expect a number of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative RGGI states to sign on to. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to share a couple of state examples. First off, I wanted to share the example of North Carolina. Governor Cooper in late 2018 released Executive Order 80, which set statewide ZEV targets of 80,000 by 2025. But this executive order was broader than just ZEV targets and also established statewide greenhouse gas reduction targets and energy savings targets for state buildings. And we think this is a great executive order as well. It requires, directed the North Carolina Department of Transportation and Department of Environmental Quality to work together on developing a ZEV plan, which was released this past October. It didn't have a specific state fleet target, but directed cabinet agencies to prioritize ZEVs in the purchase or lease of new vehicles, and created interagency climate change council under the leadership of the governor's office that meets regularly. Next slide, please. And then governors, one of their particular strong suits under the governor's office is establishing interagency working groups. Wanted to profile here Oregon. Governor Kate Brown released Executive Order 17-21 in 2017 that set a statewide ZEV goal of 50,000 by the end of 2020. At the same time she released this executive order, she released another one that partnered well, that had statewide greenhouse gas reduction goals and energy efficiency goals for the state. And the ZEV executive order requires a zero-emission vehicle interagency working group, and the working group is a collaborative effort of a number of different state agencies. So the Department of Energy, Administrative Services, Utility Commission folks, Environmental Quality, and Department of Transportation. Next slide, please. And then just wanted to highlight quickly to other states of interagency working groups that are working on advancing state fleet electrification. So California, Colorado, Connecticut, Maryland, and New Jersey. And a number of states too have EV roadmaps or plans in place for how they'll meet their EV targets. So over 12 states that we know of currently have plans in place, with Pennsylvania most recently releasing a plan this past fall. And that's it for my remarks. Thank you. I will hand things over to my colleague, Matt.
Great. Next slide, please. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to speak on this. And then, yeah, I'll just talk a little bit about the white paper that we put out this last year. So again, a summary from the regional workshops that we held. So at each meeting, we talked about eight key themes that we are seeing in states. So we talked about crafting incentives, policies, and consumer awareness, how to determine the level of charging infrastructure needed, working on regional coordination, deciding who owns, operates, and pays for infrastructure, achieving electrification for all, so incorporating equity into these decisions, as well as addressing impacts to state revenues. But for the purposes of this presentation, I wanted to talk about how we're enhancing state fleet electrification to lead by example. So next slide, please. So reasons for, I'm going to talk a little bit about benefits and then challenges, but the reasons for fleet electrification. So it offers lowering and shifting emissions and fuel savings that often align with governor's priorities to reduce emissions. So oftentimes we'll see in these executive orders that the first or the largest source of emissions in states is the transportation sector. And so this is a key way to kind of reduce those emissions. I think there's a few other things on the slide, but anyway, so it also talks about bulk orders may allow to reduce overall costs due to economies of scale. And then finally, electric vehicles are easier to maintain and operate due to less moving parts in them, so they offer that benefit as well. Next slide, please. Okay, that's not a slide I am on, but at any rate, I could talk about challenges if that's fine. I have it up on my own slide, but just a few reasons for a few challenges that's holding back states. You might imagine that electric vehicles are more expensive than normal gasoline vehicles, and so that high upfront cost is one reason that's just stopping folks from converting. We found in our workshops that there's a lack of fleet ownership in terms of public transit services, so states don't have total ability to affect that change, but maybe there's an opportunity for collaboration with those transit agencies that we heard about. Another challenge is that charging station constructions takes too long, and that energy services aren't large enough to supply the energy demand required in some of these centralized locations. States may not qualify for the federal tax credit that's offered for $7,500 for each vehicle, so you need a tax liability to offset the credit. Although there are a few options that exist for fleets to capture this incentive, but that right there is another barrier. And then the last two, there's a limited vehicle range to certain vehicles that don't exist with certain gas vehicles, and then vehicle models are restricted, especially with heavy-duty vehicles. Oftentimes those are very expensive when you get into heavy-duty models. I guess I'm going to keep going on some of my slides, but I have a few state examples I wanted to talk about. So first with Vermont, we highlight in our map, in our paper. So they have a 35% of their state fleet is plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, which is great for right now. They are on their way to have 25% of their fleet to be zero emissions by 2025. This is all laid out in a robust state action plan. And they have 14 specific actions that the state can take to lead by example. A few other things that we like to see in that was that there's education for fleet managers on availability and effectiveness of EV models, which we heard is a key challenge for states too, that just making that ease of access into this field was really important for folks. And then in Washington, they're another state we like to highlight. They have a state electric fleets initiative. In 2015, they established that 20% of their fleet would be electric by 2017. They updated it recently, now 50% by 2020. So that's some leadership from the governor's office we like to highlight. And then another key initiative we've heard that they're excited about is they're converting the ferries in the Puget Sound to electric powered. Those ferries are fairly expensive. They cost around 140 to 180 million each. They're currently working on 3 ferries, but this is a huge way to shift emissions and reduce emissions. They're utilizing their funds from the Volkswagen settlement for that to cut some of the burden, but not the entire focus. So just some actions we highlighted that states can do in summary. Using Volkswagen funds to overcome high upfront cost is something we were seeing in states like Rhode Island. They allotted their entire Volkswagen settlement to fleet electrification. States like New York and Maryland offered vouchers for EV deployment. Vermont offered or established action plans, and then states are capitalizing by centralizing charging. Yeah, and so that's it for the remarks today, and thanks again for the opportunity to present.
Thank you, Matt. And we'll be sure to get those slides in the follow-up information to everybody. So next slide, Kayla. Now we have about 7 minutes, so not as much time as we wanted, but that is fine. I think we had some great information, so I think it's been well worth it, and we're excited to get into some of the questions. I know we had one that was submitted, and we'll let Jamie read that off, and then we'll have Scott Edwards do some moderated questions.
Yeah, this is Jamie back from NASCA. And then Matt, I can read your question, but I don't know if you wanted to ask the question to the Colorado. So I'll give you about 30 seconds if you want to ask your question. Otherwise, I'll ask it for you. So just in case you...
Hello, this is Matt. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi, Matt. Yep.
Yeah. Hi. My question for Colorado was, you showed the map of EV charging stations, and I was just curious, is that just for the state fleet there, or is that also for public use?
That map is just for our state fleet. Those are our state-owned locations and where we have deployments at. There's a much broader number of vehicles or charging stations across the state. What we've taken is the approach that we're going to be looking at dwell time. That's where the vehicle stays the majority of the time. It's kind of our early rollout success stories. As many of you guys know, range anxiety is a bit of a challenge for individuals, especially with emerging technologies. You just have that unknown. And so we're trying to make that as feasible as possible for people to charge the vehicles at night, deploy them during the day, and operate on a one-stop charging process. We do have some tools in place to help us kind of look at what the future looks like with that, but since we're kind of on the front end of the process and learning how to do this, that's what we looked at as our kind of low-hanging fruit, was deploy charging stations at facilities that have vehicle concentrations, and then help them become more familiar through time with, do I have an app, which is out there, download the information to kind of understand where charging opportunities in the wild are, and then be able to branch out. I think we're working with the thought process that when we can control the charging infrastructure, we help understand a little bit more about it and help our employees. Hope that kind of answers that question for you.
Yeah, that's a fantastic answer. I really appreciate that information.
Thank you. And that's the only questions we have from the Zoom line. So with that, Scott, we're going to hand it over to you. There's not a lot of time, but I don't know if you have any thoughts to ask the group.
Well, I thought what I would do right off, since we did have a question from Tara, and maybe people have had time to think about that, I thought I'd just kind of facilitate that a little bit. And Tara, I'm going to try and capture that. And the charging cost must be borne by the end user. And just maybe you can clarify a little bit for the group if there's more to it. But what I understand is that you're saying whoever's actually using the EV infrastructure must have a pass-through charge to help offset the cost of that infrastructure in place. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And I actually
would like to tack on an extra question listening to your answer just now. When you deploy the charging infrastructure at all these various locations, do you pay for it out of your budget, or do you ask each of the agency locations to pay for it?
Right now, the way we have it set up is we're kind of on the verge of both of those things. The current deployment has been done by the agencies themselves. They actually go to the legislative body and they request the funding. This year, based off of some of our information on understanding where EV opportunities are located, Director Veach and the budget group have come together and put a request forward to help expand that. And that was the 7 locations that she had highlighted for us. So we're actually looking at expanding it out. But I think that what we're seeing in the future is when you start talking about other leased locations, we're seeing the need to kind of expand that that process of the agencies really have to be able to manage the facilities. So you start talking about conversations across organizations and working groups to more strategically plan for how do all these components interface. And I think that's the function of a greening government team. And I think we're California really talk about how you're going to wind up in a robust need to support those folks. So right now we currently are doing a little bit of both, where we ask the agencies to deploy the vehicles at the state locations or the charging infrastructure at the locations they manage. And that's really where we currently are sitting right now.
Hi, this is Brent from California. I would add to that, very similar to Colorado, we are tackling it from both angles as well. Our departments are free to submit their own budget change proposals and ask for augmentations to support their infrastructure needs. But we also have a number of smaller departments and even some mid-sized ones that either haven't or just don't have the in-house expertise to even know where to begin as to what costing would be. So back when we were, back in 2016, when we were looking at upping these policies, it was a pivotal point where we said we cannot require departments to purchase more vehicles unless we set up an in-house team and have that team annually appropriated with just that basically builds that expertise to support our departments and their infrastructure needs. So as I mentioned earlier, their budget for the upcoming fiscal year is nearly $20 million. And we are just at a point where we are starting to pivot to lease facilities as well, because we're realizing that that is a huge Achilles. And the original intent was just to focus on our state-owned facilities, but that alone will not solve the problem. So we're starting to also look at deploying, this team is looking at deploying in lease facilities.
All right, well, this is, yeah, and thank you. I don't know if you have a final bow you want to put on it, Scott, before I do some last-minute thank you remarks.
No, I think it's been good dialogue. Again, I think those questions maybe a follow-up, or I hope people got what they needed out of it and learned a few more things about that. But it does take a lot of collaboration. I think you could hear it in Director Veach's presentation, because she was really, I mean, she's lived this a lot. And so that communication style is probably something that's unique that we haven't had in the fleet, infrastructure as far as how it's built. That has not been a normal. It's been, car people dealing with car problems. And even today at our advisory council meeting, there was a lot of conversation around how do we train people up for what's coming. And some of the things that we take for granted is like, how do people actually drive the car? And I think that it's an unknown for some folks, and they want to be very, very clear on the challenges there. So I think we just have to do a good job of thinking ahead and then supporting that with all the resources that it's going to take to manage this information and then the deployment. So guess that's the takeaway that I would have for the group, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much. And with that, I want to, Kayla, next slide, I want to thank all of our speakers. This really, we enjoy so much convening people and bringing people together, but it's really our thought leaders here from the state of California, from the state of Colorado, and NGA that have been super helpful in providing information. I do want to note that what we're going to do is this has been recorded, and we're going to take this information as well as get some new, make sure we get those added slides. And within 24 hours, this will be emailed out to everyone that registered for the event, as well as be on both people's websites. And then you can share it with your teams if there's anyone else in leadership that you want to share this educational material with. And then finally, I just want to say this is open to everyone. NASCA hosts every month or every other month some webinars. So we like to, when we close one, talk about our next one. And our next one is our national webinar that we're doing on driving digital transformation at scale at state government. And this came from our recent research publication that we've been talking about, the Chief Administrator Implementing Digital Transformations in State Government. And so everyone's invited. You can find that on the NASCA website, Thursday, February 27th from 1 to 2. And with that, I want to thank everyone, both here from the NASCA and NCSFA headquarters.
Thank you.